So just quickly, we're going to look at just a couple of slides talking about human rights now, because we know that in terms of human rights, we are in a interesting times for human rights. Now, one important thing is that what happened in the history of human rights, we have this divide between economic and social rights versus civil and political rights. That we see there's a distinction between how Singapore, say, views human rights compared to how maybe the Philippines views human rights. The same thing between how China and communist countries view rights compared to Western Europe, North America. Because Singapore and China tend to support economic and social rights. Housing and education is quite good. Rights to work is quite good, but you don't have many political freedoms. So we see that in China now. China is growing, people are getting wealthier and the country is developing, but very limited political freedoms. Now compare that to, say, United States, where it's the reverse. Lots and lots of political freedoms and lots of people protesting, as we see. But access to education and health is quite bad. Okay. Now that's been this kind of long division in human rights between these two categories. One category of economic and social, the other category of civil and political. But even regardless of this, we should see human rights and all rights as being indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. What this kind of means is that human rights is one big family. All rights depend on other rights. Your rights to safe food depend on your rights to freedom of expression, depends on your rights to health, depends on your rights to work, depends on your rights to access a court or to vote or whatever. We've got to look at human rights as being this big kind of interrelated network of rights that all kind of work together. Not like we have some special rights which we think are important, other rights which are not important. Okay, so this is a critical view that you can come back to in the tutorials, of recognizing that interrelated and independent and indivisible nature of human rights. All human rights relate to each other. Okay, now just then to finish up, and we'll come back to this when we do the group work, as we've also got to recognize that nowadays more than ever, lots and lots of debates going on about human rights. There's a high level of cynicism or negative attitudes towards human rights. And I'm just going to touch on a few of these now, but we'll come back and discuss them. People say human rights are foreign, they're from the West. Now, both kind of historically, that's incorrect. That we look at the history of human rights is very much based in Africa and Asia. Human rights don't originate from the West. Some of them may have, but not all of them did. Another criticism that human rights are there just to protect terrorists and criminals and non-citizens, and they're not, protecting people. Again, terrorists and criminals, as humans, they do deserve to be treated as humans. They still may deserve punishment and sanctions for what they do, but as humans, they should get, protection as well. Their rights should be respected. Prisoners are still humans. There's criticisms because human rights seem to be ineffective. There are so many violations of human rights. So many states aren't respecting human rights. Why do we even take them seriously? They're a failure. Now, in some ways, this is true, but in other ways, not. But that's like any criminal law, like the law against stealing. People, things get stolen all the time, but we don't criticize the law. We criticize the act that happens. And then finally, we get this problem of people in many countries say, but human rights are fine, like my rights are there, why do we need human rights? And it kind of doesn't recognize that sometimes in extreme circumstances, human rights become important. We've seen this now with what's happening with COVID, that many people who before thought that they were protected aren't anymore because of the emergency that's occurred. So, and people tend to think of human rights from their own point of view, rather than thinking about human rights for people around the world and for human rights for people who are less protected, whether it's marginalized groups like the disabled or the non-citizens or refugees or children or whatever. So it's important to kind of recognize these rights and be able to respond to them. Okay, now I'm going to stop